everyone, and welcome to Grimwit with Dimwits. I'm Blondie.
And I'm T.
And here we are again.
Woohoo! We're back for more. Like it or not. Oh, sorry. Went too far.
Line. Remember, there is a line. So I seriously have to tell you, with all of the podcasts we've been doing, and some of them are honestly pretty gruesome.
They are?
They are very gruesome. I started binge watching. I started binge watching stupid little shows that are like mean absolutely nothing. And just to get my mind off of the gruesome, I watch ridiculous.
I've been doing the same thing, but funny that you're saying to get your mind off of the gruesome because, with the season and everything, I always want to bake at this time of the year.
Uh-huh.
But what do I go to? Halloween Bake Off, where all they do is bake gruesome things.
Do they have their whole lead-in music like we did?
Oh, they have it's funny. I've totally been binge watching them, and every season has a different little theme. But their stuff, of course, it's cakes and pastries and whatnot. But the gorier, the better. And I'm sitting there going "Oh, that one looks good. It's got blood and bones sticking out. Ooh, that one has maggots. Woohoo!" It's just more of the same in baking.
Okay, and I'm watching Love After Lockup.
So my love language is food.
Food, blood, and gore, and mine is just the ridiculous.
Yours is ex-cons and killers. Hello, it's always been that way.
Oh, what am I thinking? Oh my God.
Between the two of us, I think I'm the more normal.
Between the two of us, I think we're both pretty much demented.
Yeah, that's true. Nobody's winning any normal contests here.
That's what keeps life interesting.
Yes, it does.
So, what story are you going to regale us with this episode?
Well, we have been, laying kind of low on some of the dark stuff for a while because, I don't know, I guess I know you do and I do. We feel like that should be dealt out in small doses. Can be a little bit hard to digest sometimes, so we try to switch it off, week to week. But to me, those cases are some of the most interesting. So I do like to get back to them once in a while. So this week, we're going to go back into the dark arena again and cover the Milwaukee Monster, Jeffrey Dahmer.
Oh, I wish I would have known. I wouldn't have eaten dinner.
What'd you have, liver?
Close.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend you have liver before this episode.
No. Ugh. Okay, I'm going to take a deep breath.
You take your deep breath, and I'm going to start with, let the grim begin.
I won't give you any grief.
Thank you. All right, here we go. On July 22nd, 1991, while sitting in their patrol car, Milwaukee police officers Robert Ralph and Rolf Mueller were approached by a disheveled man who was only wearing boxer shorts and had handcuffs hanging from one of his wrists. The man, 32-year-old Tracy Edwards, looked frantic, and he asked the officers if they could remove the cuffs. Initially, that was all he wanted from them. But fortunately, the officers didn't have the correct cuff key, so they told him that he would need to retrieve the proper key in order to take them off. Edwards was nervous, went into a tizzy, and started telling them about this weird white dude who tried to kill him. He claims that he was offered $50 to take nude photos for him, and the next thing he knew, this freak slapped one cuff on him and tried to put on the other, but Edwards was able to maneuver and avoided the attempt. Then, he says, the guy makes them watch the Exorcist 3 movie and starts chanting and rocking his body back and forth as they watch it. At this point, Edwards knew he was in danger, so he started acting really friendly to calm the guy down. Then the man puts a knife to his genitals and makes him lie down on the bed so he can put his head on Edward's chest, because he freakishly wants to listen to his heartbeat. After a while, the man calmly tells Edwards, quote, "I'm going to eat your heart," end quote. I think my heart would stop beating anyway at this point because this is a nightmare for real.
Okay,
I'd be like, here, you can just have it. I'm done.
We've been, what, a minute into this? And I'm already going, what?
Yeah, it's gonna get rough.
Buckle up, people.
Buckle up. So Edwards thinks fast and nicely asks an intoxicated Jeffrey Dahmer if he can go to the bathroom. But when he gets up, he takes advantage of the opportunity and slugs Dahmer as hard as he can, which stuns him. Then Edwards makes a run for the door, and though there are 8 different locks on the door, he miraculously gets out before Dahmer reaches him, takes off, and never looks back. Edwards told the officers that he didn't want to go back to the apartment alone. He was terrified. So the officers agreed to go with him. You know, I would have sent those armed officers to handle that situation without my stupid, scared self, because that's their job.
Seriously? 8 locks? Did he not see them going in? Did he not see Dahmer locking them? And in the movies, isn't there always like 2 and they can't get out of those? I'd walk in and go, oh, hell to the no.
With 8 locks, somebody should have realized he's not trying to keep people out. He's trying to keep them in.
Exactly.
So Edwards and the 2 police officers returned to 924 North 25th Street, apartment 213. Coincidence? I don't think so. The officers knocked on the door, and a young, nice-looking, slightly intoxicated, blue-eyed Dahmer answered. He casually allowed the officers to come inside, claiming that there must have been some type of misunderstanding with Edwards. So I tried to restrain him and eat his heart. Big deal, right? Some people are so sensitive.
I locked him in with 8 locks. I put a knife to his genitals. What be the problem?
Yeah, jeez, man. Upon entering, Dahmer's small apartment looked tidy, but immediately the officers noticed the terrible stench of a rotten, chemically type smell that saturated the air. There were lots of empty beer cans and, oddly enough, an aquarium full of healthy fish that appeared to be lovingly cared for. There were also posters of men, specifically their torsos, pinned all over the walls. But when they looked further, they discovered blood-stained carpeting. Then, after Edwards told them that Dahmer claimed to have a human head in the refrigerator, one of the officers opened the refrigerator and looked inside. Without warning, he let out a very loud scream upon finding a perfectly preserved head staring back at him. Dahmer tried to make a run for it, but was immediately handcuffed and arrested. Veteran police officers were visibly shaken, and many said this was the most horrific and bizarre crime scene they had ever seen. There were pieces of people everywhere. Shock and revulsion continued as a large cooking kettle is removed from the crime scene that will come to be known as the most gruesome mass murder case in the history of Milwaukee.
So Edwards didn't see any of this either?
I guess not. Well, he probably wasn't in the fridge at all.
But the
I guess
bloodstained
Dahmer
carpet?
was bragging. Who knows? Maybe he told him it was beer or wine, or who knows?
True. And his healthy fish? Apparently he's not a pescatarian.
Right? Those fish were the only lucky things in that apartment. The search of the macabre apartment continued, and several more preserved heads were found in the freezer. 3 torsos were discovered in the bathtub, along with dismemberment tools. hacksaws, screwdrivers, knives, forks, and a large metal pot containing decomposing hands as well as a decomposing penis were found in his bedroom. He had several boxes of chemicals, including chloroform and formaldehyde. Dahmer had used formaldehyde to preserve male genitalia inside glass jars, like a freaking mad scientist.
Couldn't he collect coins or stamps or anything like a normal person?
You can't have sex with stamps or coins.
Well, you can be creative.
You can lick a stamp.
There you go.
Okay, that was horrible.
And that's going to have to be cut out.
Okay, focus. All right. There were plastic bags that contained more genitals, human hair, a human heart, 3 intact skeletons that had been decapitated, and 11 human skulls. Some of the skulls had even been decoratively painted. One of his neighbors said that nobody ever saw him bringing home groceries, which they thought was kind of weird, because his apartment always smelled like he was cooking up chitlins. I don't know what chitlins smells like, but it must be a very distinct smell for many of the neighbors to have thought that. Little did they know, right?
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of smells, formaldehyde is so disgustingly sour and foul-smelling. You definitely wouldn't want to touch anything preserved in it with your bare hands, because that stink will stay with you, and to me it smells just like death.
What are chitlins anyway?
I'm not sure. I'm going to assume it's meat.
I thought they were like intestines.
Oh, maybe.
That's why I asked if you knew for sure.
Maybe someone can let us know. We need to know what chitlins are.
Not that we're going to have any.
Who knows? Maybe they're delicious. Ours won't be made out of people. There was a blue 57-gallon barrel with a black lid ominously sitting in the corner of the bedroom. Several torsos and various body parts had been placed inside to speed up decomposition with chemicals which would eventually break the tissue down to a slimy sludge that could then be flushed down the toilet. You know, with him doing this practice shows just how beyond disrespectful this man was to his victims.
Seriously sounds like it. And again, I can't get over the smells that his neighbors just didn't think it was any. I mean, sludge, that stuff smells.
I would imagine. Dahmer also maintained a collection of over 74 Polaroids in his top dresser drawer of men who were dead and sickeningly sexually posed, dismembered, and also pictures of the dismemberment process. Some photos included a man who had been sliced open from head to groin, another of a completely skinned body, a freshly chopped off head in the sink, and a complete skeleton that was hanging in the closet, and of course, sexually posed.
He must honestly have thought he was never going to get caught.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what he thought, because he was planning to build a shrine with these skeletal remains right in his own bedroom. You know, fully displayed evidence of his crimes, and he didn't seem worried about it at all.
And you can bring guests to see that anytime.
Additional photos were discovered in boxes, along with a photo diary with even more chilling Polaroids. These images portrayed the twisted and sinister world of carnage that Dahmer truly desired and obviously would kill for. The photos even showed some of his victims still alive, tied up or handcuffed and put into sexual positions so that he could continue to enjoy them. The medical examiner stated that in all his years, this was the only time he had come to a death scene and felt that he had truly encountered evil. I can't even imagine the amount of trauma that was inflicted on the people who had to take part in this investigation. I'm sure they were never the same. and my heart sincerely goes out to them. God bless them.
And that's something you can never, ever be trained for. I mean, they're trained to handle certain things, but nothing can train you for that.
No. Jeffrey Dahmer was taken to the Milwaukee police headquarters, where one of the very first things he said to a detective was, quote, "Why don't you just shoot me now for what I did?" End quote. He arrives very agitated and keeps blaming the alcohol for getting caught. He said, quote, "If I wasn't drunk, I wouldn't be here right now." End quote. He's not very cooperative at first. It's assumed that Dahmer knew all of his deepest, darkest secrets were about to be revealed, and he didn't want to have to deal with the shame. Essentially, he was trying to take the coward's way out.
That seems to be a theme, and heaven forbid he'd go through a little bit of shame or whatever he's feeling. What about his poor victims?
Yeah. He needs to be held accountable. He's brave enough to do all this other stuff, but not brave enough to be held accountable. It's really disgusting.
Great word.
But a detective by the name of Patrick Kennedy sits down with him and starts talking to him and saying that he was an alcoholic in recovery. The detective used this as a way to connect with Dahmer, and it worked. This detective knew that they needed to keep him alive and find out as much as they could about what this monster had done. So he uses a friend tactic and even feeds Dahmer nonstop cigarettes and coffee so he won't shut down. Dahmer calms down, sits across from Dennis Murphy and Pat Kennedy, and just starts talking.
That takes a lot of guts to befriend him. I mean, not really befriend him, but to act like he's befriending him.
To act like you're understanding of what he's about to tell you. But at this point, they didn't know what he was about to tell them.
That's true.
He starts off by telling the officers, quote, "When I tell you what I'm about to tell you, it will make you famous." End quote. The time was 1:30 a.m., and over the next 6 hours, Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer confessed to killing 17 young men to satisfy his distorted sexual fantasies. Detectives were astounded at Dahmer's willingness to talk freely and how he was able to recall each of these homicides with so many details. It was incredible. And though Dahmer still appeared slightly intoxicated, and his attorney suggested otherwise, he insisted on telling his story because, according to him, quote, "The jig is up, so I would prefer to keep talking," end quote. His attorney, knowing that he was going to confess everything, realized Dahmer wouldn't have a defense after this. So he was asked, quote, "What do you want me to do?" end quote. And Dahmer replied, quote, "I just want to know why I am what I am," end quote.
Wow.
When asked why he killed, Dahmer said, quote, "The underlying force, I think, was obviously a warped sexual drive. Just a constant feeling of emptiness and not being able to find anything in life that really gave me a sense of happiness, peace, or fulfillment. I was always searching for something more." End quote. How twisted does a person have to be to think that this is what could give him more in life?
And doing all that could give him a sense of happiness and fulfillment?
He's so distorted.
That's an understatement.
Dahmer gave a full confession, wrote it down, and even signed it. He was offered to see a psychiatrist that could help him with an insanity defense, and his attorneys gathered as much information as possible for his defense and recorded over 32 hours of conversation with him. I watched some of his confession tapes and I flopped back and forth between feeling total disgust and just kind of wondering, What the heck went so wrong for this guy? It was really disturbing.
You're a better person than I am. I probably couldn't have watched much of that.
Well, it's interesting to hear things come from his own mouth. Like, there's a part of me that wanted to appreciate the fact that he was being so honest. And then there was another part of me that was like, what the hell? Ugh.
So listening to him, was he giving detail by detail by detail?
Well, of course, in his confession, they're only showing highlights of things he was asked.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Dahmer said that he always wondered why he was compelled to murder to fulfill the emptiness that he felt. He realized that the way he was killing them immediately didn't make sense because that gave him no lasting pleasure. And yet he still continued to murder for years, also realizing he didn't have normal feelings of empathy like most people. He did wonder why that was, but he knew that the fantasies overcame him, and fulfilling the fantasy was all that was important, no matter what. He had no answer to what triggered it all. He was very aware that he hadn't been thinking normally for years, and maybe he never did. Wendy Patricus and Gerald Boyle were Dahmer's attorneys. Wendy said after hearing of his crimes, she was surprised at how polite and cordial Dahmer was. She tried to show him that she was non-judgmental of his actions so that she could build trust with him. But this was extremely difficult for her. In the end, it worked, and they did build a bond. While talking with Dahmer, she told him not to be embarrassed about anything, and he replied that he wasn't. It had to be faced even though it was so bizarre. So again, part of me wants to give him a tiny bit of credit for recognizing that this is wrong, and even he says it's bizarre, but why do I want to give him anything for acknowledging his depravity? Maybe there's something wrong with me.
No, there's nothing wrong with you, but honestly, to me, it sounds like he knows what he did was wrong and what he was doing was wrong, but he honestly had no impulse control. I don't know if that really qualified for a insanity plea.
I do think he was psychotic, but he was far too well planned and cautious to be legitimately insane, if you ask me.
For everything you've said so far, he's fully aware of what he did, and the only thing he didn't know was why he was doing it. But that, again, doesn't make him insane.
Nope. That's exactly what I just said. What, dude? With Dahmer being a true serial killer, it was very unusual for him to want to identify each and every victim and admit to every single thing that he had done to them. But he freely admitted that his way of thinking was that if he killed these men, he could keep their bodies with him for the companionship that he so desired, and also the full control of them sexually. He kept specific body parts of certain men that he found more pleasing and would pleasure himself with those body parts even well after decomposition had begun. He even kept a scalp of one of his victims, and he would put it on his own head and pleasure himself while wearing it. He admitted that he would clean the bodies, dress and undress them, and talk with them as if they were alive. He also ate some of his victims' body parts in order to have them within his own body as a way of a forever bond. I can't help but imagine how quickly these bodies started decomposing, and yet he kept being intimate with them for weeks at times. And the scalp thing? What the hell?
Oh my gosh. My face, the only way I can describe it is like I took a bite of something nasty, is making that ooh face. Because that whole thing was just like, ooh.
Yeah, that's pretty disturbing.
I don't know. You look at me. What do you think? Still
that's
disturbing.
Pretty disturbing, but it always has been.
Oh, that's just so nasty.
I didn't recognize your nasty face. You just look the same.
Okay, well, it's regular with a side of nasty. How's
there
that?
you go. Regular with a side of nasty. I know a few people like that.
And you tell people?
At one point, he felt like maybe he was meant to do these killings. Quote, maybe there's a devil, and maybe it's my destiny to carry out the work of the devil. End quote. This new way of thinking had him engaging in incantations and watching movies with dark characters like The Exorcist III and Return of the Jedi, where he identified with the villains. He wanted to do mind control and even went so far as to buy yellow eye contacts so he could captivate his victims by emulating the Dark Emperor. He would go out pretending to be like these evil characters to fulfill his fantasies. Quote, people go to these gory horror movies to get a glimpse at what they show in the movies. The only difference is that I did it for real. End quote.
And I'm sure the Star Wars franchise are glad to know that their movies inspired Jeffrey Dahmer.
I don't think they really care.
Oh.
I don't think it's hurt them much.
No, I don't, but still.
Once these horrific details of Dahmer's crimes leaked out to the media, Jeffrey Dahmer immediately became a household name across the country. This cannibalistic monster was real, unlike all the other frightening fictional monsters that horror stories usually stem from. And the unbelievable details of this gruesome story absolutely shocked people. I remember hearing about this and then seeing Dahmer's face. I don't remember if it was on TV, newspaper, or what, but I can honestly say he did not look like the kind of man anywhere near capable of these monstrosities.
He absolutely did not look like a monster. That was the scary part.
That is the scary part. Dahmer further explains that as strange as it sounds with his comfort level for murder, he doesn't actually enjoy killing these men. There were a few of his victims that he was really quite fond of, but he killed them out of loneliness and desperation for their companionship. Murdering them was only a means to an end, because nobody would stay with him and do exactly what he wanted them to do. All his partners wanted their desires fulfilled as well, but there was nothing in it for him to satisfy them, so he wanted no part of that.
Wow.
I know. As a gay man, he never wanted to be submissive. He only wanted domination. It also really irritated him when his partner squirmed and moved around during sex. He only ever wanted them to be perfectly still in order for him to achieve gratification. Because Dahmer was a natural-born problem solver with an IQ of about 145, which puts him at a nearly borderline genius, he quickly realized that his ideal partner would be a man who won't have any expectations from him and who can remain perfectly still. So the only logical way to achieve that was through necrophilia, which ultimately will require him to kill. In Dahmer's twisted mind, this is the only answer to his problem. So he moves forward with it. You know, he freely admits to his selfishness, and he seems to approach this logically, and as monstrous as it is, he came up with a solution. And I really hate that my mind can comprehend this, even a tiny bit, but I wonder if he's just saying this to sound slightly less evil, because he loved to play with and dismember a lot of dead animals when he was a kid, and that was just for sheer pleasure. I see you, Jeffrey.
There's so many things I want to say, but it's just, the whole thing is just mind-boggling. He's selfish. I don't think he's insane. He killed as a child. He's killing for gratification so they can be still, so he can be... there's just, like I said, there's so much. It's just better not to say anything.
But I've already said all that.
No, but this is what I'm saying. You're saying this.
Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
know,
yeah.
So for me to reply to all of this, it's just so much.
All right, the 80s gay scene was new at this time, and lots of gay clubs were springing up. They were an outlet for men to go out and express their secret fantasies. During this time, many men didn't use their real names because some were married with kids and afraid to come out of the closet. So the relationships between gay men were often shrouded in secrecy, creating a perfect venue for a predator to prowl. Within the gay district, many men found Dahmer a little odd and kind of a misfit, but nobody ever talked about this quiet, polite, and soft-spoken man in a fearful way or even thought he'd be capable of hurting anybody. If anything, Dahmer looked like he could have easily been a victim should he run across the wrong guy. He was a nice, clean-cut, shy, and kind of handsome man with light blonde hair and clear blue eyes. This made it extremely easy for him to gain someone's trust, then viciously murder them, and in some instances, attempt to create sex slave zombies for companionship. Who would have guessed? Absolutely no one.
And I wonder, he must have picked guys that didn't have confidence or were quiet themselves, because I would imagine if he went after somebody that was more aggressive, he may not have achieved what he needed to achieve.
Well, it didn't matter. He actually didn't choose men that way. He seemed to gravitate towards kind of the life of the party guys, and he liked a man with a muscular physique. So he wasn't choosing wimps, big personalities for sure, if nothing else. But the fact that he was just, as we'll find out, drugging them, he just got full control. It didn't matter how big or small you were.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, that was not even a thing. He liked a muscular man.
Interesting.
Yeah. And though Dahmer's victims were of all races, most of them were gay men of color. It's suspected that within this well-known gay club area of the city, the police rarely pursued missing gay men of color. On top of this, the years that Dahmer was most active were also the same years that AIDS deaths in Wisconsin had increased 10 times over. So people were scared. Gay men were just disappearing, assumedly due to the disease, and no one really knew if they were sick, dead, or moved away. Dahmer just happened to start his killing spree in a perfect window of time, built around intolerance and fear, and also when it wasn't so unusual for a person to just disappear. This may have been part of the reason why so many men went missing before law enforcement took it seriously. All these circumstances created the perfect hunting ground for a serial killer.
Literally the perfect storm.
Literally. Believe it or not, at one time, Jeffrey Dahmer was just a normal, happy kid. He claimed that he never had any type of abuse or trauma in his life as a child. But something went horribly wrong. His home was a roller coaster of tension between his parents, and he claimed that their constant bickering greatly affected him emotionally. With his parents being so focused on their toxic relationship, Dahmer was neglected a lot. His mother, Joyce, was an alcoholic and became addicted to a string of medications. She was a hypochondriac and suffered from depression. This even led to her becoming physically abusive toward her husband. His father, Lionel, was studious and consumed himself with work. After marriage, the couple quickly realized that they were completely different people and their union was not easy. So his father spent long hours in a laboratory to further his career, but ultimately neglecting his family and staying away from his unstable wife.
I guess this isn't a case of opposites attract.
Actually, they are opposites. She's a drug addict and alcoholic, and he's a smart guy, it sounds like.
Yeah, but no, look where they are. They just don't want to be around each other.
Right.
And the neglect of him, not that I'm justifying, but he talks about companionship and emptiness. If he was neglected as a child, there you go.
Just always looking for someone to love. Early in the marriage, after an argument, an unstable Joyce dramatically ran out of the house in frigid temperatures and went about 4 blocks with no shoes or jacket. She obviously was not thinking clearly because she had been pregnant with Jeffrey at the time, and put herself in great danger. She was known to suffer from mental illness. But then finally on May 21st, 1960, Lionel arrived at the hospital and he saw his wife, the happiest she had been in a very long time, holding their healthy new baby in her arms. She told Lionel, "You have a son," and they named him Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer. Joyce suffered from many illnesses and relied on drugs to keep her from becoming too anxious, and spent more and more time in bed, isolated from her family. Lionel was forced to do most of the work for the family, including holding a job and taking care of all the household responsibilities. His home life became unbearable. But during all these troubled times, their son Jeff was a typical happy baby. Joyce remained at home while Lionel continued to work and study, and for the next 2 years, a comfort level with this arrangement was finally achieved between the couple. It wasn't easy, but there were some happy moments between them. Through it all, though, Jeff continued to be a sweet and easy baby. In September of 1962, Lionel was offered a position at Iowa State University, and the young family moved down to Ames, Iowa. As Lionel continued with endless hours of work, Joyce's feelings of abandonment returned as she spent her days in isolation. She felt suffocated at home, and their fights became more excessive with Joyce's violence. At one point, she even swung a kitchen knife dangerously at her husband.
Wonder if it was at his genitalia. Sorry, it was there.
I was going to say something, but I'm not.
Now we can see who's the nice one of the two.
I'm not going to ride your dark pony, okay? Through this tough time, when Lionel would return home, Jeff eagerly rushed to the door to greet his father, craving his affection. And even though his mother was neglectful toward him, Jeff loved his family. When a dead animal was discovered under their home because it smelled really bad, Lionel pulled the animal out, and 4-year-old Jeff was thrilled when he grabbed a handful of the decaying animal's bones. He repeatedly threw the bones into a bucket because he liked the sounds they made. He smiled and said they were like the game Fiddlesticks. Who lets a 4-year-old touch a dead animal? Come on, Dad, what were you thinking? In the spring of 1965, 4-year-old Jeff began complaining of pain in his groin area. The doctor said he had a double hernia that would need to be removed immediately. Within a week, little Jeffrey had surgery, but when he woke up, he was in immense pain. His recovery was not quick or easy. He stayed in the hospital for several days and returned home just to lie on the couch in pain for quite some time. Following this surgery, Jeff's personality changed significantly. He was never again his usual happy self. I really don't know much about hernias, but I never would have thought that they'd be capable of changing your personality. It makes you wonder if something else maybe went wrong with the surgery.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That's not normal.
No. Winter arrived, and on December 18th, 1966, Joyce gave birth to another boy. Throughout the pregnancy, Jeff remained excited and hopeful for a little brother to play with. His parents weren't sure if the new baby would bring out any jealousy with Jeff, so they allowed him to name his new baby brother to create a bond. He named him David. But a second child exhausted and overwhelmed Lionel and Joyce, which only created more tension between them.
And on a side note, I didn't know Jeffrey Dahmer had a brother.
Yeah, he has a brother. And I didn't include it in my story, but apparently he's been accused of victimizing his brother as well.
Oh.
Yeah.
Not good.
No. When Jeff finally started school, he enjoyed it, and there was even a teacher that he connected with. So he gave her a gift of a jar of tadpoles. She thanked him and acted like she really liked the gift by keeping the jar in the windowsill of the classroom. But a few days later, Jeff noticed that the tadpoles were gone. She had given them to his friend Lee. So Jeff went to Lee's house, found the tadpoles in his garage, and immediately poured motor oil into the jar to kill them. He said he did it because he felt that the teacher had betrayed him. Okay, so this gave me super creepy Bad Seed movie vibes. What will you give me for a basket of kisses? I'll give you a basket of hugs. Do you remember that part?
Okay, I'll be honest. I've never seen that movie.
Oh
and
my
after
God.
that little rendition you did, I won't be anytime soon.
You have to see it. I think this might have been the turning point for me where I realized I like evil things. This kid is haunting. She's the worst.
Yeah.
And all throughout the movie, she says, what will you give me for a basket of kisses? And then the mom says, I'll give you a basket of hugs. And it's real dramatic. And of course, the little girl's planning her next kill as the mom's hugging her. It's bad.
Yeah, I'll jump right on that train.
Yeah. Anyway, okay. At the age of 13, when he reached puberty, Jeff realized he was gay. He never said anything to anyone about it because he knew his family would have an issue with it. So he kept it a secret. He experimented as a teenager with a younger boy. They were hanging out in a treehouse. They laid down together and kissed. Jeff claimed it was consensual. As a senior in high school, he started having fantasies of having sex with a completely submissive person. He was very attracted to the male muscular physique and started having violent sexual fantasies about a jogger who regularly jogged near his home. He even devised a plan to hide in the bushes, attack the man, and then knock him unconscious with a sawed-off baseball bat. He felt he needed to do this to be able to touch, cuddle, and explore the man's body to gratify his sexual fantasy.
That's a huge jump from realizing you're gay to hitting somebody over the head with a sawed-off baseball bat so you could play with them.
Right? And this is supposedly a grown man. And he's only like 16 or 17 at this time.
Where did the jump come from? I have no words.
Again, he's a problem solver. He found a solution and he was going to move forward with it.
But he went, again, violent sexual acts couldn't just be sexual acts.
I guess not, because then he'd have to open himself up to somebody and be vulnerable. And I don't think he liked that.
It sounds like it.
But the day he put his plan to attack into action, he hid and waited, but the jogger never came by. To this day, no one knows who that man was, but we do know he was very lucky to have chosen not to jog that path on that day. I'm curious how many men have thought about whether it was them or not. It would be interesting to find out.
It'd be terrifying to find out.
Right? Dahmer was pretty much left to do whatever he wanted, because once his younger brother David was born, he pretty much got no attention at all. His parents separated when he was 18. He felt he couldn't change their situation, so he, quote, tried to find some happiness his own way, which was obviously the wrong way, end quote. In 1978, his parents filed for divorce, and his mother kicked his father out of the family home. Then she fled to Wisconsin with his younger brother, but left 18-year-old Jeff behind and alone in the home. His father had ended up in a motel, and with no communication between him and his ex-wife, he didn't know Jeff had been left behind to fend for himself for over 2 months, where he felt depressed, lonely, and bored. Jeff never actually said it, but he was essentially abandoned by his mother, and following this, he didn't speak to her for many years, well after his arrest.
I can see a pattern.
With what?
The abandonment, the lack of love, the no attention.
Yeah.
So he thinks he can't hang on to it. It doesn't justify anything, don't get me wrong, but again, a pattern seems to be forming.
Many kids have gone through worse and don't turn into cannibalistic murderers, but I hear what you're saying.
True. It must still be that groin surgery.
Yeah. After his mother left for Wisconsin, Jeffrey felt confused and abandoned, so he drank excessively. He had been drinking secretly for years at this point, but now it was even worse. He was left with very little food and no money. But the one thing he had now was freedom. Freedom to do anything he wanted. He had stayed in communication with his father throughout this time and never mentioned that his mother had left him alone. I think it's probably safe to assume that's because he wanted freedom to explore his sexuality far more than sustenance or anything else.
I bet you're right on that.
On June 18th, 1978, 3 weeks after Dahmer had graduated high school, he was driving in town and decided to pick up a young, very good-looking, shirtless hitchhiker. His motivation was the young man's muscular build. So he pulled over and asked Stephen Hicks if he wanted to party, because he had beer and pot at his house. Hicks was on his way to a rock concert, but agreed to party for a bit. After hanging out for a while, Dahmer got the impression that Hicks was not gay, but he still wanted to be with him. So he decided he would have him. Quote, "It was the first time that I had the desire to control. I lost all feelings, so I guess I just decided to do it, whether he was gay or not. It didn't really matter." End quote. So Dahmer grabbed a 10-pound barbell and knocked Hicks over the head twice with it, leaving him unconscious. Quote, "I don't know exactly why I hit him, except I wanted to stay with him for longer. I thought how amazing it was that I was actually doing it to another human being. It shocked me that I got to that point. And that was a feeling of excitement and control, but mingled with a lot of fear." End quote. After Dahmer knocks Hicks out, he uses the barbell to press into his neck and strangled him. With his excitement and nervousness, he ended up masturbating over the body, but not doing anything else. He wasn't sure where to put him, so he dragged him under the crawl space of the house. He did go and look at the body for a sort of morbid curiosity as to what a dead person looks like. Shortly after spending a few more quality moments with Hicks' body, Dahmer panics and realizes he has to get rid of it. So, quote, "I started dismembering him and everything. There's something about him that I'll always remember. Cutting the legs off, and then the arms, and the head." End quote. When asked if he touched anything, he says, quote, "I probably did. The liver and the heart." End quote. Dahmer liked how the organs felt. It turned him on. He then cuts him up into small pieces and puts the body parts into trash bags so he can better manage the parts. He had separated the head and occasionally masturbated to the body parts. He says he got excited doing that and kept the parts in the house for another 6 hours. He claims to have had the most satisfaction from doing things with the body after death, and was never sure why the dead body parts excited him so much. I mean, come on, he had to have some idea of why. He's the only person who could answer this question, and yet he still won't admit to why. I think when his mind is clear, even his own thoughts repulse him.
He probably doesn't want to admit how unstable he is with an IQ of 145.
Yeah.
It sounded in the beginning when you were talking about him wanting to be with him like he was almost like a little kid having a tantrum. I want it and I want it now.
Right.
Ugh.
And then the things he said about, I couldn't believe I'm actually doing this. Like he was proud of himself. He's all over the place.
He is.
Dahmer was later diagnosed with necrophilia, a sexual condition in which a person is aroused by having sex with individuals after they've passed away. He has paraphilia, a sexual disorder, which is when people have something different or aberrant about their sexual makeup. At about 3 a.m., Dahmer, who had been drinking, decided he needed to dispose of Hicks' corpse. There was a ravine nearby, so he put the trash bags filled with body parts in the backseat of his car and headed there. On the way, he was pulled over for crossing a median line. The officer gave him a field sobriety test, and he passed. But before Dahmer drove off, the officer noticed the bags in the back seat and asked him what was in the bags. Dahmer calmly told him, quote, "It's garbage. My parents are breaking up and I'm alone. I couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd get rid of the garbage." End quote. The officer believed him and let him drive off. Following this, Dahmer realized that he had the ability to manipulate people and get away with things. This also shows that he's a very quick-thinking, cool, calm manipulator. He doesn't sound crazy to me.
Not at all. And isn't necrophilia, isn't that while the bodies are still in one piece?
I don't know. I just know it's after the bodies have died.
Yeah, I know it's after they died. I guess I just assumed they were all in one piece. I didn't think it had anything to do with cutting them up and having sex with parts.
That's too specific for me. I have no idea.
Okay. I'll have to look it up.
Yes, you will. He ended up taking the body bags back to his house and found a 2-foot galvanized pipe that he could stuff the bags into. He then dumped all of Hicks' personal belongings into the river, including the knife he had used to cut the body up into manageable pieces. He did all of this when he was only 18 years old. Nerves of steel, what balls? After a couple of months, Lionel Dahmer came back to the house and realized his son had been abandoned. There were empty liquor bottles and cans everywhere. Dahmer was obviously drinking too much and was unable to take care of himself, so Lionel and his then fiancée, Sherry, moved into the house to help out. Outside of Dahmer needing food, I'm sure he wasn't thrilled to have Dad's watchful eye back on him.
I want to know where he got the money to buy all the alcohol.
I wondered that as well. I mean, was his house just loaded up with alcohol when his parents took off?
His mom was an alcoholic.
That's true. Didn't even think about that. Following this, and with the help of his dad, Dahmer was accepted to Ohio State University. But with his alcoholism, and despite his father having paid in advance for his second term, he only lasted 3 months before he flunked out. Wow, talk about being privileged. I would have been killed on the spot if my parents paid for an entire semester of school in advance with no refund, and I messed that up with sheer stupidity.
You and me
Dead
both.
on sight.
You and me both. And again, I go back to his IQ of 145. Why did he flunk out?
He was into his alcoholism. I mean, probably just couldn't function.
Oh, he wasn't a functioning alcoholic, I guess.
Yeah, I guess not. At his father's urging, he then enlisted in the Army, where he was trained as a field medic, where he claims this training actually helped him better identify body organs for his future crimes. But he was occasionally reprimanded for intoxication while stationed at Fort Sam in Houston, Texas. One drunken instance of insubordination resulted in his entire platoon being punished, earning Dahmer a severe beating from his fellow recruits. Dahmer wasn't the only person being abused. A soldier named Billy Capshaw shared a room with Dahmer during their military service and claimed he was constantly sexually assaulted, tortured, and controlled by his roommate. A second soldier roommate also claimed that he too had been abused by Dahmer. Both of these claims came out after Dahmer was arrested and were not reported while they were serving. Dahmer only stayed in the military for 2 of his 3-year commitment. He was honorably discharged for being unfit to serve. But wow, no consequences for his sexual abuse crimes. This guy has luck on his side for so long. It's ridiculous.
Extremely ridiculous. And he was honorably discharged for being unfit?
Yep.
Okay.
After being discharged, he didn't want to return home to face his father. So he went to Miami Beach, Florida, because he was, quote, tired of the cold, end quote. In an attempt to live by his own means, Dahmer lived in a motel and found a job at a delicatessen. But he ended up spending most of his salary on alcohol and was soon evicted from the sleazy motel for non-payment. This forced him to return home to Ohio in September of 1981. While Dahmer was in Florida, he was a suspect in the Adam Walsh kidnapping. He was even identified by witnesses, but there wasn't enough evidence to arrest him, and another mentally ill man had confessed to it. But it was never proven that this other man actually did it. Many still believe it was Dahmer.
They don't know, even to this day, who killed Adam Walsh, do they?
His dad, John Walsh, says it was the other man, and his first name is Otis. I should have written this down. I don't remember his last name. But there's no proof that Otis did it. And there were actually witnesses who said they saw a man that looked like Dahmer with Adam Walsh and near the dump site for Adam Walsh. Mm-hmm. And also something about a blue van, and Dahmer was in a blue van at that time through his work. His work had a blue van that everybody was able to use. And that was connected to the Adam Walsh case as well. There was a couple of other things, but I didn't write all that down. But I thought that was super interesting that he was even thought of for this crime. And when they asked him about it after he was caught, he said he didn't kill children. There was no way he would do that. He wouldn't kill children, but he did. As we go on in this story, he did kill children. He did hurt children.
Wow. So, yeah. I had no idea about that. That's a very new and upsetting fact, actually.
Right? Well, and Adam Walsh had his head cut off. And that's one of the things that Dahmer did with a lot of his victims. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, that was just a side note. I thought it was interesting, too.
Very.
With his drinking getting in the way of him being able to support himself and or living with his father, he was sent to live with his grandmother. Dahmer actually loved his grandma very much, and he described her as the perfect grandmother. They had a great relationship. She was very supportive and loving. She gave him privacy and never said anything about his sexuality, but he didn't confirm that he was gay because he knew she would be judgmental due to her Protestant faith. To me, this sounds like his dad was just passing off the problem that he contributed in creating to his sweet, elderly mother. Not cool, Lionel. Not cool at all.
Well, and it also sounds like he was starting a new life with a new woman. He didn't want to have his annoying son around.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, that lines up too. While living with her, Dahmer said, quote, "I don't like being gay, and I really made a sincere effort to change the way I was living, to change my desires, to get rid of the homosexual feelings that I had and any sinful thoughts. I started going to church with Grandma on a regular basis and really tried to stifle any sexual feelings that I had," end quote. He prayed that he would be strong enough in his faith that he could fight off his urges. But then, on August 8th, 1982, at a Wisconsin State Fair, Dahmer was observed exposing himself in front of women and children. For this incident, he was convicted and fined $50. Well, I guess the church stuff didn't last too long. I saw that coming.
That's a complete different MO. Exposing himself, number one, but to women and children?
Right.
That
is different.
What is it? What is it, 360, 180, 360? Complete turnaround from what he's 180. 180, what he's actually into.
Yeah. Very unusual. He was probably drunk again.
Oh, that's right. I forgot.
Dahmer was hanging out in a library when a man came by his table and dropped a note that said he'd like to meet him in the bathroom and offered oral sex. Dahmer stated, quote, I was in the library just sitting in a chair reading a book. It was the last thing I expected, you know? I just laughed it off to myself. I thought, that's an awful feeble attempt to get me to stumble, you know? I never saw his face or anything, but that's what triggered it, I guess." End quote. He did go to the bathroom to meet the man after about 5 minutes, but the man wasn't there. This missed opportunity caused him to start fantasizing about men again. So eventually he gave in to his desires and started going to bars in the city's gay district. Another way Dahmer tried to satisfy his sexual desires is, quote, "I was walking around Southridge Mall and I saw a mannequin that kind of caught my eye. I wanted that mannequin, so I went into the store and there was nobody there. So I stayed there until closing time. Then got the mannequin undressed, got a taxi back home and stored it in the closet at my grandma's house. I used to play around with it, dressing it up and undressing it, pretending it was real." End quote. He cuddled with it and used it for sexual gratification, but found it disappointing because it wasn't like the real thing. After a week or two, his grandma discovered the mannequin while she was hanging up some clothes that she had washed for him. She asked him about it and why he had it. He made up that a store had extra mannequins that they were selling, so he bought it. He says, quote, "I think she told my dad, so I figured I better get rid of it. So I took it down to the basement and smashed it up and threw it out in the garbage." End quote. How was this hard plastic object tempting? It's not like it was even anatomically correct. And how did he get a whole mannequin out of a mall with nobody seeing him? The whole thing's crazy. I'll never understand that one.
And again, here comes the impulse control. I want it, so I'm just going to take it.
Yeah, I'm just going to hang out till the store closes, and with all the great luck that I seem to have, the never-ending luck, I'm going to take a naked mannequin, full-size mannequin, out the door, and nobody's going to say a word.
And all I kept
Even the cab driver.
Good point. And all I kept thinking was, at least he left the clothes. He wasn't going to be caught for shoplifting.
He took the clothes off, right?
He took the clothes
that's
off.
A decent thing for him to do. What a freak. It's so bizarre. In order to find a place to meet men for sex, Dahmer started going to gay bathhouses. These bathhouses were set up for hookups, but Dahmer found that meeting men this way was not exactly what he wanted, because these men also had fantasies. He wanted men who would submit to him, and that's all he was interested in. So he started drugging men to unconsciousness so that he could dominate and rape them. This also helped with them not moving at all, because he hated it when his partners moved. After doing this many times, he was kicked out because he had overdrugged a guy and medical attention was needed, which brought unwanted attention to the seedy establishment. The owner of the bathhouse had him blacklisted from other bathhouses as well. Nobody reported this as a crime because at that time it was not yet accepted, even by the police, that a full-grown man could be raped. What a crazy world it was back then. Without access to bathhouses, Dahmer now had to try to figure out a new way to get what he wanted sexually. So after reading a newspaper article that contained a photo announcing an upcoming funeral of an 18-year-old attractive male, he had the idea of stealing the fresh corpse and taking it home to play with. But according to Dahmer, he tried to dig up the coffin and the ground was too hard, so he abandoned the plan. That's a lot of hard work and a lot of risk of getting caught. His desperation and sickness, it's unfathomable.
Continue.
I'm like, where's she going to go with this?
It's just so bad, and it's so wrong, awful. And it's horrific and horrible, and just so disrespectful to take a person, 18-year-old that had just died, and you're going to take him home to play with him?
Yeah.
I don't even want to say what's wrong with you, because you could say it throughout this entire story.
Yeah, exactly. On September 8th, 1986, Dahmer was arrested for lewd and lascivious behavior for masturbating in the presence of two 12-year-old boys. He had initially claimed that he was urinating, but there were witnesses, so he was charged, but only with disorderly conduct. And on March 10th, 1987, Dahmer was sentenced to 1 year of probation.
His luck continues.
Right. Following this, Dahmer was hired as a mixer at the Milwaukee Ambrosia Chocolate Factory, working the graveyard shift. This enabled him to go out on the weekends where he could drink again and meet people. Quote, I needed live companionship, someone I could spend the night with and have complete control over and be able to do with what I pleased. Something real instead of fake like the mannequin. That was my fantasy. Little by little, I started falling away and just gave up trying to resist. End quote. This is the first half of the sickening story of Jeffrey Dahmer. I think we'll all need a week to decompress and cleanse our palates, so we'll bring the second half of the story to you next week. Put your seatbelts on. It's going to be a chill you to the skeletal bones wild ride.
Thank you for the gruesome and gore. And
it certainly gives us a lot to think about, because we haven't even gotten to most of his victims. And yeah, y'all need to be ready for this.
I do have a question. How old is he at this point? Do you know?
What year did we leave him? In 1987? So he's 27 because he was born in 1960.
Okay. Thank you. I'm looking forward to hearing about the rest of his depravity and craziness. And
you're really looking forward to it?
I'm smiling and nodding. See me smile and nod. We want to remind everybody to take care, have fun, and let your imaginations run wild.
Bye, everybody. We just want to thank you all for sharing your time with us. And if you'd like to send in your creepy little grim bits, we would love to hear your personal stories, interests, and suggestions. Please email them to grimwitwithdimwits@gmail.com. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at grimwitwithdimwits, Twitter at grimwitwithdimwits, and Facebook, Grimwit with Dimwits. Join us every Monday for new episodes, and feel free to share us with your grim-loving friends.
We would really appreciate if you would take a minute to rate and review. 5-star ratings go a long way and would really help us out. Until then, we would love it if you'd come back next week to delve with us into the strange and unusual things we just can't wrap our skulls around.